At school, normative gender expectations are absolutely reinforced in various ways. And I could cite hundreds of studies, but don't panic, I won't. In one, a researcher was observing preschoolers, and they found that the amount of time that children played with same-sex peers determined, in many ways, their behavior. So what I mean is, the more time little girls spent with other little girls, the more their behavior became more stereotypic, the more they became like girly girls. And the more time that little boys spent with other little boys, the more they became rougher and kind of stereotypical little boy behavior. So as the girls all continued to play together, they became more girly, and vice versa for the boys. So that's just one example of how peer groups can directly and strongly affect gender socialization. And this does include, by the way, punishing each other in some way for failing to conform to stereotypes. What do we mean by punishment? Teasing somebody, verbal harassment. Verbal insults are the most frequent adverse behavior in same-sex interactions as well as in boy-girl interactions. So a boy will make fun of another boy if they think he's acting too much like a girl, and vice versa. Another kind of punishment kids experience at school for not falling in line with typical gender expectations by their peers is relational aggression. So this means intimidation or manipulation. If you do that, we're not going to play with you anymore. Or, if they act like that, they're not going to be part of our group. Or, you shouldn't be talking to that person. Telling friends that you won't like them anymore unless they do what you say. Or keeping somebody out when engaging in some kind of activity. We know that the interaction among peer groups in school constitutes a major determinant in the gender socialization process in school. And this is at all ages, not just little kids. Younger kids might be more open about it. They might actually say to another little kid, if you play with them, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. But it absolutely occurs in high schools, at other ages as well. Now, Raffaella Best studied peer group dynamics from grade 2 to 5, and then into junior high, and she published a book based on her findings entitled We've All Got Scars. Great title for a book. And part of what she paid attention to was gender. And she said that when kids are in school, they actually learn 3 kinds of curriculum, 2 of which have to do with gender. So of course you have the academic curriculum that we're all used to. But then she said kids at school also learn gender role curriculum, which means they learn how they're expected to behave for their own sex. And they learn how to interact with the opposite sex, which she called gender relationship curriculum. And kids do this with each other. So this isn't something that involves the teachers. This is a peer reinforced gender dynamic. So she said there's very, very separate expectations for little boys and little girls at school regarding gender, how they embrace their own gender, and how they interact with the opposite sex. So what she saw was that in 2nd grade, boys really began learning fundamental rules for the male sex role. She said it's really around grade 2 when boys and girls have much more emphasis put on conforming to their gender. So for little boys in grade 2, she saw them beginning to distance themselves from girls. She saw that they began to attach more importance to acceptance by their male-oriented peer group at school, and that they began to consider that more important than any kind of reward or affection from their teacher. She saw that boys in grade 2 also demonstrated that they were learning negative and positive canons, which means positive is a need to be strong and to be first. Negative included don't associate with a sissy or a crybaby, don't do housework, and don't show affection. So what she means by these canons is that they were beginning to realize in grade 2 negative and positive expectations. What did she have to say about the female students? Well, she said that girls in grade 2 absolutely also began to learn sex roles. But for them, the emphasis was still more on having fun, not winning, and more on cooperation, not competition. She also took note that girls in grade 2 had more leeway in their sex roles. So just as I said previously, little girls could demonstrate some typically masculine behavior, and they wouldn't face any kind of consequence for it from their peers. What about teachers? What can we say about teachers at school? Well, teachers can, and usually do, send multiple gendered messages to their students, sometimes through the curriculum. Now, they don't set the curriculum themselves, but they have a lot of leeway in some subjects regarding how they teach them and the material used. Gendered messages in terms of organizational decisions in the classroom, how a room is structured, how they appear to value the work of girls compared to boys, what differential attitudes and expectations they hold toward them, how often teachers interact with male and female students and in what context, how students are treated in the classroom, the kinds of examples used in class, the kinds of reading materials students are directed to, the kind of gender inclusive or exclusive or neutral language used and in regards to what topics, how they react verbally and non-verbally to the choices their students make in regards to all these factors. When asked, most, if not all, teachers express the viewpoint that they treat boys and girls equally and that their gender is irrelevant from an educational standpoint. This, if or when it occurs, is called gender blindness, meaning that the teacher just does not see gender, and because of that, their classroom is gender neutral and equal. Now, this is often purported to be the best approach in education, the kind of gold standard to strive for in regards to gender in the classroom. But is this really possible? Since teachers are human beings who have been socialized according to gender expectations themselves, not robots. And actually, the fact is, this commitment to impartiality in how teachers treat male and female students, and in their expectation of equal achievement of male and female students, is often not reflected in teachers' reported perceptions. So in reality, when they think they treat male and female students the same way, and even when they want to, even when they take specific steps to ensure they do, research indicates teachers as a whole are not as successful as they think they are. Instead, this goal of gender blindness tends to provide a false sense of security, a feeling of objectivity, a false sense of being impartial, and is often at odds with what is really going on, because a teacher's own experiences and attitudes may reflect biases towards boys and girls, even if completely unintentional and often totally subconscious. By contrast, this stereotypical tendency, of female students to be more quiet and conform is often perceived by teachers, for example, as simply being a passive student, not somebody who's really inquisitive. And at the same time, the way that boys learn, being more, I shouldn't say being more, stereotypically being more rambunctious and outgoing, is viewed as a negative quality in learning. So a teacher's beliefs about a student's learning potential can be based at least partially on gender. So I'm going to give you an example here. This study actually took place in England, and some schools were in urban areas, some in rural areas. 6 schools were involved in this study. Children and teachers were interviewed, as well as being observed. Teachers were asked what they generally expect to experience with their students regarding gender differences and achievement generally, but then also specifically in terms of language ability. In the teacher interviews, the teachers repeated many of the common gender stereotypes that often go unchallenged and just accepted. So they would say things like girls settle down easier and boys just don't like writing. These are the stereotypes that support the idea that girls are more compliant while boys are disruptive. That girls are naturally better writers and more disinclined to be active, while boys are more likely to be active. But the interviews with the teachers also revealed a much more complex thought process than simply girls are like this or boys are like that. Generally, the teachers tended to view girls within a framework of things they have achieved and compliant behavior. So the language that these teachers used to describe their female students included referring to female students as quote unquote wanting to please and willing to work, which sounds very positive, but also implies that they are passive and not very inquisitive. Boys were viewed within a framework of things that they cannot or will not do. So the language used to describe boys was to describe them as outgoing and needing a challenge. And this was reinforced by the teacher's comments about behavior. So let me make this a bit clearer. Good behavior, what is generally considered good behavior in a classroom, being quiet, listening, getting down to work quickly, that kind of thing, was naturally attributed to girls or expected of girls. Stereotypical bad behavior for boys, having more trouble settling down, having more trouble focusing, all of that was generally expected for boys. And instead of that problematic behavior being viewed negatively, it was perceived by the teachers as being an example of how inquisitive they were for learning. So in other words, girls were generally perceived to be passive learners, and boys were generally perceived to be active learners because they were inquisitive. If you consider how a teacher's own, girls were generally perceived to be compliant. And it's kind of an odd thing, right? Because that's what you want in the classroom. At least that's what you think you want. You want students who are going to just kind of settle down quietly, settle down quickly without any difficulties, and sit there and listen and take it all in. So that's generally what we want. Those are considered positive behaviors. Compliant, yes, but positive. At the same time, the behaviors of boys and the attitude of boys was much more negative. However, at the same time, those negative behaviors, like asking a lot of questions, not being able to sit down and settle down quickly for long periods of time. At the same time, those typically negative or negatively labeled character traits were also considered an example of a more inquisitive mind than the female student who just sat there and took it all in. Now, what about the gender of teachers? Does it matter if your teacher is male or female? Well, we have certain stereotypes that I think have existed for quite a while regarding the difference, if any, between male and female teachers. There is the general stereotype that male teachers are usually more authoritative and dominant, that male teachers are more dictatorial, more assertive, more do what I say with students, while female teachers have a stereotype of being more permissive and flexible. They tend to be less teacher-centered and more supportive of students, or student-centered. Those are the stereotypes. We have a stereotype that female teachers will allow more discussion in class. And then for both male and female teachers, we tend to expect them to interact with male students more than female students. And usually when you hear this, you automatically think that it means that boys typically get into trouble more at school, and thus the teachers have to pay more attention to them simply because of disciplinary reasons. Is that true, though? Is there usually more interaction with male students because of disciplinary reasons, or is it because of other reasons? Well, let's break this down by looking at different levels of schooling. In general, research indicates that male and female elementary school teachers do tend to demonstrate different classroom interaction patterns with students in Canada and the United States. Male teachers do tend to be more authoritative, whereas female teachers do tend to be more supportive and expressive. But these differences are not really overt. Instead, they're usually much more subtle, not glaring in-your-face differences. The majority of research indicates teachers of both sexes may interact more with male students than with female students in the classroom, simply because they don't have a choice. That male students tend to respond to or initiate interaction with teachers more than female students do. In elementary school, male students tend to do more of the calling out in class than female students. And they tend to be more likely to initiate teacher interaction, even if it's negative. So yes, typically male students end up having more interaction with teachers, and this demands more of a teacher's time. And whatever the reasons are, the result is that female students tend to have less interaction with the teacher in elementary school classrooms. If we look at discipline, is that going to make a difference? I found this interesting. This study was conducted with early childhood education teachers in pre-K and first grade classrooms. And what they did was they paid attention to the disciplinary practices that teachers implemented with male and female students. And they said that yes, gender seems to play a big role in it. So they developed an instrument that they called the Beliefs About Discipline Inventory and used this in their study. And with this, they determined that teachers in their study approached discipline for male and female students very differently, even when dealing with the same infraction. So whether that is calling out without raising their hand or chatting when they should be working. So the boy and the girl are doing the exact same thing. What they saw was that teachers used different methods of discipline for male students and female students. They tend to discipline female students through reason, which meant that the student would be confronted, and they would then talk about it, and together they would develop a plan to correct the behavior. So in the future, what are you going to do? But when it came to male students, reasoning wasn't used with the discipline. It was simply cause and effect, apply a consequence, and that was it. And this might seem like a small difference, but again, it's like a grain of sand that combines with many others in the education system as a whole. That combined socializes students according to gender, by disciplining girls through reason while disciplining boys through a cause and effect method. Now, something that we have to acknowledge in regards to elementary school is that the vast majority of elementary school teachers are female. That's simply the way it is. By early elementary, I mean up to and including grade 3. Now, there are very clear historical reasons at the root of this, as traditionally women have always fulfilled the role of caregiver and being a nurturer of children, while traditionally men fulfilled the role of provider, which are very dissimilar positions. But in today's society, there has been a huge transformation in the division of labor. And we have, or we think we have, less rigid gender expectations. However, when it comes to elementary school, we still have the vast majority are female. And it's like this around the world in different countries, not just Canada and the United States. Why is this? Part of it certainly is because of the historical reason. And because, tied into that, because caring for younger children has always been the role of women, it's theorized that male teachers feel the need to teach at levels that coincide more with being typically masculine. And if they do teach these levels, it's almost like they feel they need to redefine their masculinity. And furthermore, it's even been theorized that having male teachers from junior kindergarten to grade 2 are at a higher risk of being blamed for sexual misconduct, because in the earlier grades there tends to be much more physical nurturing. Little hugs, pats on the back, cuddles. In the really early grades, sometimes they need help in the bathroom. So male teachers face the dilemma of being close enough to their students to care for them and respond to them and interact with them in a caring manner, but while still maintaining an appropriate distance to avoid any appearance of being inappropriate. And while absolutely not fair, absolutely indicating a double standard in which male primary teachers are on the losing end, it is a reality. It's one of these things where that's the way it is, even though it's totally unfair. That's simply, for some people, that's their perception. Now, what about junior high school? Well, this differential expectation and treatment continues. In junior high classes in both Canada and the States, research suggests that male students continue to either initiate or cause more interaction with their teachers. Being more likely to call out in class. Everything that we talked about for elementary school, that in junior high school, it really, really continues. And then we get to high school. Well, high school. Okay, what goes on there? There is still a difference in high school regarding the typical effect of gender of the teacher and on teacher-student interaction patterns compared to earlier grades. Now, we actually have some specifically Canadian research regarding how teachers interact with students, with gender as the prime focus, coming out of Memorial University in Newfoundland. There was an observational study conducted in 3 school districts and 18 schools, some rural, some urban, involving high school students and 36 teachers. The study found that in high school, although teachers generally interact with male and female students in a similar fashion, there continued to be a tendency to interact with male students more, to comment on their work, to comment on their responses in class, but also to criticize their conduct more. And the researchers in this study kind of read into the results a bit deeper and considered the implications of teachers interacting with male students a bit deeper, and they came to an interesting conclusion. They theorized that because male students in high school were on the receiving end of more interaction based on their intellect, that these interactions reinforce active thinking by males. So what I mean is, because the male students did because what the male students did or what they completed academically was not accepted as much as what the female students did, a result of this was that the male students became more active thinkers because they were challenged more. So the higher number of criticisms from the teachers, although criticisms are still a type of feedback for the male students, and that encouraged thinking. The question is, are these different patterns of behavior just a part of the natural experiences of schools? How should teachers attempt to avoid any kind of covert sex discrimination in their classrooms, or even just simple favoritism, approach this? Well, you've got 2 basic approaches a teacher can take. Trying to treat their male and female students in the same manner, or trying to treat them in a different manner because of their gender, but with good intentions. So either you acknowledge difference or you don't acknowledge difference. Interacting with students from the perspective of sameness, treating everybody the same, obviously means just that. Trying to ensure that all students have the same experience in your classroom in every way possible. But is that the best choice? Or is it indeed better to treat them as what they are, different? A differential conscious treatment of girls and boys, with the goal of achieving equal outcomes for both. The reasoning behind this approach is that if a particular group has been less advantaged in the past, it may need more attention. For instance, a teacher may stress participation of female students in science and press female students to do more in math, or they may encourage male students more to read literature. But at this point in time, this approach would actually mean that in several areas, male students are the disadvantaged group, as female students excel and surpass them. So male students would actually need preferential treatment now in order for an equal outcome between both, kind of like affirmative action.